Jared knows what moms really want for Mother's Day. The opportunity to just sleep in and dream of idle playgrounds, empty sinks, and perfectly folded laundry. Of course, there's no better way to compliment mom's peace of mind than with a piece of fine jewelry from Jared Jewelers. A sparkling diamond pendant necklace, or even 14-karat gold hoop earrings. Perfect for the woman who keeps everything in your family perfect. This Mother's Day, be the dad who went to Jared.
Time and time again, detection-based cybersecurity solutions have failed to stop ransomware. It's time to rethink your posture. ThreatLocker offers a zero-trust approach to endpoint protection that stops ransomware before it strikes. ThreatLocker delivers a deny-by-default strategy where you choose what to run, then block everything else. The result? No stress about the latest malware, because with ThreatLocker, you block it by default. Take charge of your cybersecurity and gain control over your environment. Visit threatlocker.com today and stay one step ahead of cyber threats.
Empire. Hey, babies and babies and babies and babies. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy draft weekend, everybody. All right, let's get into it. No Callow today. Callow, I'm very proud of him. Ran a marathon again up in Pennsylvania. Second time he's done that. He did, if you'll recall, back in the fall. Actually, the day of the Hail Mary game, the Bears and the Commanders, I'll never forget it because he was running in a marathon that morning, the Marine Corps Marathon, and I went down to go root him on down in the Georgetown area when they were passing through when they go over the Key Bridge. And I'll never forget, this is weird. I don't know why I'm sharing this right now, but I guess just because he ran a marathon again, of which I did not go to Central Pennsylvania to support him, but I'm doing it from afar and doing it here now. I'll never forget, I went down, it was early in the morning. He was going to pass through that area of Georgetown, like around 9, maybe even earlier than that. And the game was at 4, which was why I was able to go. I remember it got moved into the national window, so I was able to go root him on before I had to go out to the stadium. And I'll never forget, I was like walking around in the morning there in Georgetown, and it's such a beautiful, quiet, serene place to walk around. And I had this like premonition that something crazy was going to happen with that game today. I mean, it had so much buildup. You know, it's Caleb and Jaden for the first time playing each other. It's the Bears and Commanders who had the number 1 and number 2 overall pick. Both took franchise quarterbacks. Caleb obviously being from here. Both teams had winning records. One was 4-2, one was 5-2. Nance and Romo were here. They moved it into the national window. It just had all of the makings of something big was going to happen. And, you know, I never would have envisioned that, but I remember having this like premonition that it would. And obviously we had a historic moment that afternoon. So I'll always remember whatever I'd like think about Callow running that day. I think about the Bears and Commanders. It was the same day as the Marine Corps Marathon. Anyway, congratulations to him on his second marathon in the last, 6-7 months. It's a incredible accomplishment. All right, let's get into the Commanders draft. In a little bit, I got John Keim from the John Keim Report. Oh, it's a long way of saying Callow's not here today. I'm letting him rest. We'll talk through what the Commanders did with him tomorrow. And then I'll talk about what everyone else did in the draft as the week kind of progresses. I'll go through some of the divisions and some of the teams and try to make sense of what they did. Did it make sense, et cetera. But today I'm just going to focus on the Commanders. We're going to spend a long time with John Keim in just a little bit as we go through all of the picks, all the decisions, and what comes next, which is clearly they still have a void at edge rush. And considering some of the prominent names that are out there, I would assume that they're going to go out of their way to try to find some kind of help in the second wave of free agency now that we are through the draft. We spent a lot of time on Friday. If you didn't hear Friday's show, you can kind of hear our thoughts, me and Callow, and my thoughts specifically on Josh Kinerly Jr. because the draft was Thursday night. So we were able to kind of go through the first round pick, what it kind of meant. Was it likely that they would go tackle? I would go, no, it wasn't the most likely position to me. Like if I had to rank the positions they were going to do with the first round, and I kind of said this, the last couple of weeks, I kind of landed on this team is in what they believe is a championship window right now, especially with this quarterback. they've attacked free agency and the trade market within free agency as if they have a team that needs a couple of, like needle moving type performers. And if they were to bring those performers in here, it would upgrade their chances to get back to where they were, if not more. And obviously the goal is to win a championship here, and it's to do it now. That's why you trade away assets and get Laramie Tunsil. It's why you trade away a 5th round pick, bring in Deebo Samuel. They restructured his contract. They didn't even like extend his contract. So they're putting him on a kind of a show me deal to try to make it happen and make it worthwhile. So, like they signaled to the NFL that they think they have a team they can win with, which is why I kind of landed when the draft was rolling around. I'll never kind of project what are they going to do on day 3, because that really truly is, to me, best player available type situation. You know, the only position I would have been surprised if they took on day 3 was a quarterback. I mean, I just did not think they would take a quarterback at all, knowing who they have on their roster right now. Sam Hartman is in development. Marcus Mariota is trusted backup here. They brought in Josh Johnson for competition, maybe as the number 3, we'll see. So like nobody even needs to be in development here. It was the only position I didn't expect them to address. Anything else was kind of on the table for them. And then once we got through rounds 1 and 2, it would have made no sense to me if they did not take a running back at some point and ended up taking one in the 7th round. But I spent a lot of time talking about Josh Connerly, and where I landed on all of it with them going into the draft was they have a lot of positions of need. Edge rush stood out. Corner, you could argue, and the wind was blowing that way. As of, late in the week, it looked like corner was a real prominent possibility. I felt an upgrade at running back was warranted. They decided to pass on Travion Henderson. The entire first round went by. And he was not selected until early in the 2nd round. I thought he would have been a no-brainer pick for them in the 2nd round if he actually got to the back end of the 2nd round, which obviously he did not. I thought interior O-line seemed like an obvious possible choice if someone like Tyler Booker was available, and he wasn't. He was selected 17 selections earlier by the Dallas Cowboys, so he was off the board for them. The 2nd best interior offensive lineman, Gray Zabel, off the board by the time that they got around to it. When I had heard the smoke about linebacker, I just had a hard time buying that would happen. Safety, I had a hard time buying that would happen. Wide receiver, I just had a hard time buying that those things would happen, mainly because I was pretty much convinced, because of this championship window aspirations that they have, that they're going to pick somebody that's going to be a starter. That's Josh Connerly. He's going to walk in the door. He's going to compete to be the starting right tackle. If he doesn't show the propensity to be ready day 1, then I would expect Brandon Coleman will be the starting right tackle. But all goes well, I think we know where this is heading. Laramie Tunsil is the left tackle. Coleman eventually moves to guard, whether he's the fill-in for Sam Cosmi until Cosmi comes back, or he directly competes with Nick Allegretti and makes Allegretti a backup, or maybe they move Allegretti to right guard as the stopgap until Cosmi comes back. Let's see how it works out. My expectation is Coleman moves to guard here officially in the not too distant future, assuming Connerly walks in as a projected starter. But I think they were going to take somebody who was going to start, which is why I didn't think it was necessarily necessitated to get a receiver, or definitively not a linebacker, or definitively not a safety, unless you're going to get one like Malachi Starks, where you go, he's just better than what we have, or we believe that to be the case. So the 2nd round pick rolls around, and it's Trey Amos from Ole Miss and the team. And I think a lot of teams are doing this, but the team is basically saying, we actually thought about picking him in the 1st round. This was one of the strangest drafts I think I've ever seen. There was not like a lot of clear-cut, very obvious blue chip talent players coming out this year. Once Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter went off the board, you could make an argument there weren't many players that really stood out as obvious. These are going to be not just starters in the NFL, but really high-end starters. And obviously no one knows, and people can project out differently. But this is where this draft was different, where we were talking about it's the 31 flavors draft. Everyone's going to pick the people they like. Their scouting circles are going to come to conclusions about people that might be wildly different than others. And that's why I think the draft was really hard to project. But once we got around to the 2nd round, corner, which was clearly a potential pick at the end of the 1st round, became ever more present. I thought they might go running back if the right one was there. I thought that they might, and outside of that, then I thought corner would be the way they would go. Amos is the pick. I think we need to get used to the idea that someone is going to be changing schools a lot now because of the transfer portal, because of the NIL, because of you guys want to play. And if the playing time's not there like it was at Alabama, okay, well, then you're going to go somewhere where you can play. Obviously, money's going to play a role. And he's a player that, not unlike Jaden Daniels, kind of started somewhere, matriculated somewhere else, got better and better and better. He looks and feels like a void that they have short and long term, which is an outside corner. He's not particularly tall, but he's got that look and the long-armed feel of somebody who can play that position. And they've outwardly said he's an outside corner. So I look at this pick, and obviously you just want to be optimistic about it. And they're saying he was ranked much higher, and hopefully he walks in potentially he's in a competitive situation too, by bringing in Jonathan Jones from New England, having Mike Sanders-Still, who clearly can play inside or outside, although they've openly stated they want him to be inside. And you got Marshawn Lattimore, who should be a number one corner for you if he's healthy. And we're going to find out where he is once training camp rolls around, as they give him the whole offseason to rehab, get better, be ready to play, and hopefully be the player he was a few years ago when he was basically a Pro Bowler every year. You look at the possibility of, if Amos can walk in as a starter, it would be clearly on the outside, which would move Mike Sanders-Still back where they want him in the first place, in the center of the field or in the slot. And Lattimore is your de facto number one. Your then primary backups are Noah Igbenogany, who was very good as a slot replacement, and Jonathan Jones, who, like Sanders-Still, is very versatile. Probably better in the slot because of size, but can easily play on the outside. So Connerly gives the offensive line flexibility to move some people around, but you have a better group from top to bottom from where they were. From a year ago to this year, what the offensive line looks like, Connerly and Tunsil dramatically change all of this, and changes from the starting lineup to the depth pieces. If the depth is Nick Allegretti, Andrew Wiley, Nate Herbig, probably, then think about where the depth is from where it was a year ago, and how they got marginalized as things went along. Players were getting nicked up. People were getting hurt. They were running a ton of plays, more than anybody in the NFL. There was attrition that was adding up on them. They're a much deeper unit there. Same thing just happened at corner. Think about a year ago where the corner unit was as a whole, and think about where it is today. Now, you got to be optimistic in both cases that Connerly is a plug-in starter, that Amos eventually is, if not immediately, a starter on the outside for them. And you have to be optimistic that Lattimore is going to look like he did, even though he's missed a lot of games the last couple of years. Can these guys be this? If they are, and things come up roses for them like it did a year ago, you suddenly have the two units that felt like they could be, in the case of the cornerback unit, a complete weakness, into definitively not a weakness, and potentially in both cases a strength. So these picks both felt really on the nose for me, for what Adam Peters and Lance Dumark and everybody did in the front office to try to not only get them good players and players they think they can start and be really good contributors, but at the positions of need the most. Offensive line, my inkling was go interior offensive line. They loved this tackle. And corner, as things progressed, I didn't think they needed another corner, but this certainly helps, and it certainly is insurance on Lattimore if he cannot play a full 17-game season. Okay, so we get to day 3, and now this is where they addressed the other thing that was a massive void, in my opinion, on the team coming out of the season. The further you get away from it, the more you recognize that they went really far with not a lot of explosive, game-changing playmakers on both sides of the ball. They have clearly gone out of their way to try to help the offense change that immediately. The Tunsil trade helps them with the offensive line. Debo's addition gives them a clear-cut 1A number 2 wide receiver for them. Of this also, obviously, not unlike Lattimore. It depends on Debo playing like he did a couple of years ago, and that last year is not an indication of where he is in his career now. They've motivated him by putting his contract into the situation that it is. So with the 4th round pick, which was their next after the 2nd round, they acquired Jalen Lane out of Virginia Tech. He is undersized as a player, but he's got top speed. He's one of the fastest receivers coming out of the combine. Obviously, for the Hokie fans out there, you probably know him really well. He's a burner. And more than anything, think about this. Jamison Crowder, Olamide Zaccheaus are not on the roster any longer. They needed a punt returner. And they'd like to have one that could make some plays. And they got one here. And this is the first thing they said about him. He kind of walks in the door, hopefully winning the job as the primary punt returner. And then we'll see how he gets utilized within the offense. Between Terry, Debo, we know what Noah Brown is. Michael Gallup is a wild card here coming out of the year off where he retired. KJ Osborne has now been here for 6 months. They re-signed him. There must be a reason. Luke McCaffrey is probably in a dogfight to get a role and make the team. Probably will have to be a returner on kickoffs for them to kind of warrant the position moving forward, but we'll just have to see how that one plays out. This is a crowded field all of a sudden. Lane brings pop, though. The type of pop that they have not had on the offensive side of the ball. Now, he's a fourth-round pick. I don't want to go too crazy here, but they're looking for explosive playmakers. And then in the seventh round, they got another one in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who missed, he was like ineligible last year, missed a lot of time, had a great season the season before, similar to Amos, started at a lower tier program, matriculated his way up to Arizona, had a really big year. And what stands out about him, explosive speed. This is where they're missing in this position. I've been talking about running back for months here. I could have made the case for months here that running back could be a priority position for them. They did nothing in free agency other than to secure Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez back, so they were quote unquote running it back. But I know they were looking for more explosive playmaking ability. And this is, again, this is a seventh round pick. Didn't play very much last year, but he comes in with the type of explosive speed that it almost screams he's going to, short of being someone they unexpectedly, like slow to get up to speed with the team. He's someone who's going to walk in the door and have plays being written up for him, because this is what they're looking for. They want players who can get big chunk yards that they can hit home runs with. It's not that they don't like B-Rob. It's not that they don't love Eckler. Of course, he's in the last year of his deal and probably towards the end of his career. So finding someone to kind of replace Eckler down the road is another reason to take someone like Krosky-Merritt. Jeremy McNichols, they love as a special teamer and a reliable teammate and a player who can fill in, but he's not going to be a home run hitting running back for you. Chris Rodriguez kind of falls into the similar mold of B-Rob, very physical runner, could be a really good goal line back, is not currently a home run hitter for them. They've been looking for explosive playmakers. They added 2 players who could be that. So both of those things make sense. The 6th round pick of Kane Medrano has a relationship with the linebacker coach Ken Norton, who was with UCLA a couple of years ago. Medrano, not unlike the other 2 on the day 3 picks, he jumps off the charts with speed, versatility. He's a tremendous athlete, similar to Lane and to Krosky-Merritt maybe to a degree, a little bit undersized, but let's see what they do with him out on the field. He screams someone that's going to make a difference, hopefully on special teams immediately, and then they'll have to see if they find a role for him, because Frankie Louvu is one of the heartbeat players of the team. I know they still like Jordan McGee. They typically just kind of play 2 linebackers. So finding a spot where he gets on the field and can become a contributor will be interesting. And of course, Dom Hampton, who was a draft pick from a year ago, kind of started at safety, matriculated up to practicing at linebacker, makes that a very crowded group too, where some decisions are going to have to be made. Overall, I think the team did very well in the draft. And considering it was just 5 picks, each of them seemed purposeful, filling a role, knowing what these people are going to be. And a potential explosive running back, a punt returner first who might add some juice on offense at the wide receiver position where they don't have a tremendous amount of speed outside of Terry McLaurin. A linebacker who could be a special teamer and potentially a backup. Well, that's a depth thing that good teams seem to have. Top 2 picks, they make all the sense in the world. All of a sudden, you're getting yourself in position to have a prominent offensive line, top to bottom, through depth, and a cornerback that is expected to be on the outside, not being asked to move around, but hopefully giving the flexibility for the other players to be where they are anticipated to be and asked to be by the coaching staff. I think it was a great job. I'll check in with John Keim next, get his thoughts on it. Bram, watch the show, ESPN 630, the Sports Capital. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season is in full swing, and we've just started the NBA and NHL playoffs, which has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. With the largest selection of odds on everything from the MLB, NHL, and the UFC, Bet Online remains the number one online source for all your sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the Bet Online casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and a live casino. Bet Online. The game starts here.
Time and time again, detection-based cybersecurity solutions have failed to stop ransomware. It's time to rethink your posture. ThreatLocker offers a zero-trust approach to endpoint protection that stops ransomware before it strikes. ThreatLocker delivers a deny-by-default strategy where you choose what to run, then block everything else. The result? No stress about the latest malware, because with ThreatLocker, you block it by default. Take charge of your cybersecurity and gain control over your environment. Visit threatlocker.com today and stay one step ahead of cyber threats.
All right, let me welcome in John Keim of ESPN and the John Keim Report off of the Commanders draft, where they went offense in the first round, defense in the second round, and then they seem to fill needs at depth or potential role plays beyond that on day 3. Hey, John, how are you?
All right, Bram. I'm tired, but I'm good.
So let me start with the first junior, which we've talked about this so much. This draft for them was, considering where they were picking, anything but a quarterback. So right. Now that they took a tackle, what was just your reaction to it?
Well, yeah, I like the pick. And, it's funny because I think it seemed to catch some by surprise. But you and I talked about this too. I like what they're trying to do with Jaden Daniels, which is protect the heck out of him. So, I think there's a trickle-down effect by making this move, just like there was with the Laramie Tunsil trade. Because then, you get Tunsil, you move in Coleman, but you're going to keep him in the starting lineup because you think he can play. And I think the same thing is here with Connolly. You now have a wall that you can put in front of Jaden Daniels. If all goes right, this next several years, this is your 5, right? And to have a group that could stay together, et cetera, and build in front of Jaden, I think is very, very important. So you have Connolly, I would think could be, right now I would see him as a right tackle. They say he can play tackle or guard. I know teams are looking at him at both. And Coleman can play tackle or guard. So he could end up going to left guard, and you could end up having Nick Allegretti and Andrew Wiley as your backups, which I think would make for tremendous depth. So I just think there's so much good with that move that it's not a sexy move, but I think it's a really good move. And then because you can improve, here's the thing too, and you're going to get into some of the other picks, but you give a quarterback more time to throw who can get the ball down the field. Jaden at his core is a pocket passer. He can run, but he's a pocket passer. So you now give him more time to operate and do what he does really well. Then you add a receiver in the 4th round who has speed that can also stretch the field, right? So and then you can improve the run game through some of if you get better blocking up front, which I think you will with this group when they start to hit their stride. So I just think there's a lot of positive trickle-down effects with that one move.
So there are 2 units specifically, and one is the offensive line that I think we need to focus on what's been done in what I think is a very short period of time.
Yeah.
If you look at what their offensive line was just a year ago, include the depth of it, and then look at it now. And I don't know where Coleman's going to go. I assume it's going to be guard, that he's going to be a starting guard, and probably when Cosme is back, the starting left guard at some point. But that's fluid because of Cosme's injury. That's what I think is going to happen. Just think for a second where they were a year ago, top to bottom with the unit, and where they are now. If Allegretti, Wiley, Nate Herbig is now a primary backup for them.
Right. Top
to bottom, what they've done to change their offensive line. It doesn't mean that it's going to be dominant, but it doesn't look like a liability anymore, and it could be a strength. It really is truly remarkable what they've done in a year with it.
I agree. And you go back to prior to free agency in 2024, because it's dramatically different, because after that point, they've added Tyler Biadasz, they've added Brandon Coleman, they've added Laramie Tunsil, they've now added Josh Connolly. And so that's four 4/5 of what your starting line is going to be most likely when Cosmi comes back this year. So, and it's it can be a really good group. And here's the other part, Bram. Look at the NFC East. Like, look at what the Giants did, adding another pass rusher in Carter. Now you have Tomlinson inside. You have Burns and Thibodeau and Carter now, right? You've got to have guys who protect the passer. Micah Parsons with Dallas. We know the Eagles have a really good defensive front. So just to improve that line, to me, was imperative. It's not just about, getting the whatever. It's about, like, the division you're in. It's about protecting your greatest asset and improving multiple areas of pass protection and run block. And to me, it was a home run. And there were a couple guys in that draft that I felt like would be a possibility along the O-line up there. Connolly was one. Tyler Booker was another. He went higher.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure if they'd pull the trigger with Connolly over one of the corners there, but it's funny because they got one of the corners later.
His athleticism, Connolly, too, really seems to, everyone's made a big deal of the Cliff Kingsbury note that he handed to Adam Peters saying, pick this guy. And some, clips of him, obviously, where he's doing some things that people that size typically shouldn't be doing. But consider, like, Cosmi's got extraordinary athleticism for someone his size. Hopefully it'll be the same off this knee injury. Yeah. Here comes this player who comes in, extremely athletic, movable piece. Coleman is really athletic, like super athletic. Tunsil's probably the outlier, actually, of this group of people that move, right? Right. They have a group now that, like, last year they were extremely successful with their offensive line early in the season, with the exception of red zone, where they made a lot of errors there, but they were able to utilize the athleticism of the group that they had. I think it's more athletic than it was. And with its depth, I think this also allows them to play the offense that they want to play, because I do believe also that attrition mattered. They were running more plays than anybody else in the NFL last year. By the time we got to the second half of the season, it started to catch up with them. Their depth started to show. Suddenly the run game went away. Jaden had to become Superman. If they want to play the way they played last year, if that's how they're going to be, that they're going to be this up-tempo team that runs more plays than anybody else, they had to do the things that they did.
Yes, and they love the guard tackle pulls, for example. They love to get on those screens. So you need guys who can move and block in space, and they've definitely added that. So it does, to me, it not just changes what you do, it enhances what you want to do. And so I think, like, that's a big thing. And you look at the last, Bram, to me, the eye-opening game last year was the Saints game. I felt like that line got bullied. And I don't usually say that about a group, but I felt like they did there. And you wonder, was this just a one-game thing? But they didn't. It was not I think you use the right word, attrition. I think for whatever reason, they just weren't as effective down the stretch. So, like, the pressure percentages on Jaden Daniels increased during the last 7 games. The yards before first contact for running backs decreased substantially. So that, whether it was, injuries adding up, just inefficiency, whatever the reason, that was happening. So now you've improved that front and you've improved your depth. Because, I think it was wise to hang on to Wiley. They basically gave him essentially a pay cut. It's not billed as that, but that's essentially what it is. But he's a good player. Like, if he's your backup, that's good.
Yes.
Because he can play tackle, he can play guard. If Allegretti is your backup, that's really good. And the other part of that, too, is they're both professionals. And I say that meaning not because they're getting paid, but because the way they conduct themselves. Like, I think, one thing I've always appreciated about both, but especially like Wiley. Wiley was here 2 years ago when the line was getting destroyed by fans, media, whatever. And he was always very gracious. He was always very professional to deal with. And I only bring that up because, like, you want guys like that. If you're going to put them in a different role, how are they going to handle it? And I think he and Allegretti would handle it very well. And I only say that because that's why you keep guys like that around, and it really helps your depth.
Yeah.
And so, in a 17-game season, soon, some point going 18, you better have O-line depth and, to me, running back depth as well.
All right, let's get to the second round pick, Trey Amos, who has been around with a bunch of different schools now. I think this is going to become the norm, actually, for a lot of players coming out because of NIL and the portal and all that stuff. So I think people need to look at that very differently than they used to when people transfer around different schools and they just end up with better opportunities, whether it be for playing time or money or both. And so I think he's one of these people. He goes from Alabama to Ole Miss. He's a star at Ole Miss. You had landed on corner as being a prominent possibility in the first round.
Yeah.
Adam Peters, he confirmed that it was very close to him, this player being the pick in the first round. The player that you picked for your mock draft went one pick later. So, hats off to you for almost landing that guy perfectly, that he ended up going literally one pick after where you thought he was going to go. So he was available. I buy that if Connerly wasn't on the board, that either that player or Trey Amos actually would have been their first round pick. I actually buy that to be the case now.
1,000%.
Yeah. And so, like what I was talking about with the offensive line, I want to talk about the corner unit for a moment. I want you to think a year ago what their corner unit was and think about what it is right now. And what an unbelievable job this front office has done flipping that one. Another one that one really was a liability. You had to make a case for the offensive line. That one really was a liability. They were changing it on the fly. And again, there's a bit of you got to buy Marshawn Lattimore is going to be healthy and can play like he did a few years ago. If you buy that and if you see that, this again becomes not just, it's no longer a liability. It could very much be a strength.
Possibly, yeah, for sure. And there's a couple things. One, it's funny because at the 29th pick, when we did our mock, the three names I considered were Maxwell Hairston, whom I ended up picking, Josh Connerly, and Trey Amos. And they ended up with them. But I also know all three were in the mix because they absolutely liked Hairston as well. I really like Amos. And he was the guy that, in the early part of the process, when I was looking at corners for them, that I felt would be really good. And then I kind of went to Hairston just based on some things you hear and you're not sure. So you kind of, they're not going to tell you exactly what's going right. You know what I mean? And you're not going to hear all that's going on. But point is, you knew they liked them. So I buy that he was in the mix for them at 29 as well, because there was definitely some projections there, but I know that they liked him and he fits what they want. And so to look at the corner depth, so you look at their top four corners going into the draft, and it was obviously Lattimore, and then it's Samerstill, Jonathan Jones, and Noah Igbenogany. And those three guys, outside of Lattimore, the other three are all best suited inside. So you didn't have another true outside corner. Now, Samerstill can play it, but he had to play it out of necessity, not because that's where he was best.
So can Jones. So can Jones.
And so can Jones, for sure. And and they're both competitors. They're both exactly the kind of guys you want on your team. We saw what Samerstill can do. We've seen what Jones can do in New England. They're good. They're very good players. But you needed another true outside corner, and now you have one in Amos. And there's a couple things with that. One, Lattimore's only played 26 games the last 3 years combined. That's not very good. So can you count on him for 17 games? That's asking a lot right now. So you need another guy that could fill that role. So because now if something happens with Lattimore, well, you got another outside corner, and you still have other guys who are good pros who can handle the outside job. Maybe not their best spot, but they can play it. And so, I just think it gives you more flexibility and versatility with it. The other thing is that the way he can play press coverage. Now, he's not always jam press, where he's getting up and getting on the guy, but he can play press, right? So he's up close and he can play zone. But I think by being able to do that, you add some versatility to the calls you can make, because if you don't have a guy who can play that well, you might line up in that, but it's not as good. So when you watch him, there are a couple plays that he made in college that I was watching. I think I tweeted one out where it's like you're playing, it looks like he's in man, and then he basically, it's almost like a zone match where then he's handing off the guy to the safety, curling out and coming, either curling out to the flat because it's a wheel route, you go knock the ball down, or you see a crosser coming over that you're coming up and picking the ball because you fooled the quarterback. I saw that multiple times. So it to me, just like with Connerly, it enhances what you can do with some of your coverage calls. Now, is it going to be, is he Deion Sanders? Well, no, but he's a good competitor. He's a willing, he's not a big time hitter, and very few corners are, but he's a very willing, aggressive corner who comes up to make a play, in the run game too. So there's I really like this pick, and that's why I said, like, I knew they liked him, but I knew that, like, I almost flipped a coin for him at 29. That's where so I like the guy. I think he's just, and it's again with linemen, you can't have enough corners. It's like pitching in baseball. That you need, a lot of times you need 3. Now, where does he fit in right away? That's going to be the question. Is he going to be a 4th corner? What's he going to do? But he'll play because he has the ability to do so.
So you can't get everything. There were a lot of position groups that Washington could have addressed here. None more prominent, I think, than edge rusher. So why do you think that wasn't one of their top 2 picks?
So going into the draft, you heard that maybe they didn't view it as the pressing need that everybody else outside there, just like
they didn't last year either. Frankly, they said they were going to generate sacks, and everyone said with who, and then they actually had a lot of sacks. They did not have a good run defense, is what they did not have a year ago.
It's funny because somebody said, well, they didn't dress the biggest need edge rusher. I said, well, listen, I agree they need an edge. I agree it would have been good to have a young edge to build, get some more youth at that spot that you can grow with the Johnny Newton inside or whomever, right? I definitely agree with that. But I also felt like, is their pass rush worse than it was last year? No, not with this group. Like Dante Fowler had a good year, 10.5 sacks, didn't do a whole lot in the second half of the year, but also if you look at his market, like that kind of suggested what people thought of him. It's not like he was, TJ Watt out there. You know what I'm saying? Like there wasn't a huge market for him in free agency. Why is that? And I like Fowler. I like what he did. I thought he helped. But their 4-man pass rush with him was not very good. So it was one of the worst in the league in terms of sack totals out of 4-man rushes. But overall, I think like 22 of their 45 sacks came in 4-man rushes. That you needed. They weren't going to get that guy to help them there. Maybe not. I don't know. But I agree. Like the run defense to me was a far bigger issue than finding edge. I still think they need to find that guy somehow, and maybe you can go out and get a veteran to help this year. And it'll probably be something you go into next year looking for the same thing. But there were definitely some guys on the board that you could have looked at for sure. But I don't think you force it to do something that, like, if you love the corner, you take the corner.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I have zero problems with what they did there. And then after a certain point, you could have gotten an edge rusher in the 4th round, let's say. But that's just, if a guy's not there you believe in that can help you, and it's like, I think the return they got in the 4th round, the receiver, is going to help more than an edge guy would. It's a hard spot to come in and make an instant impact, especially after a certain point. You know what I'm saying? So I think if you don't get one in the 1st, maybe the 2nd, then that's then just scrap it because you've got guys there who can rush the passer now. I don't think it's this great pass rushing group by any means, but I think the depth is there to have a comparable rush to last year.
I have to call their games, John. So the 7th round pick, I'm going to have to ask him personally if he's okay with this, but JCM is already coming out of my mouth. So I hope he's okay with that because he's a mouthful.
Well,
sure.
It's funny. So there were like, I'd go on some shows before the draft and I'd bring up running backs like various rounds, and I would just sometimes say Jacory because I'm like, is it Krosky Merritt? Is it Merritt? I'm like, yeah, JCM is far better.
Yeah,
far better. Yeah.
So, when we talk about things that they need, and they needed a lot. I mean, that was like the more divorced you get from the amazing year that they had, the more you realize there was a lot of things they had to do to actually really try to put a roster that is really on par with Philadelphia, who's everybody's chasing, who they're really chasing because they got to go through them to get home games in the playoffs. So, what is one of the things they need? Explosive playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. They went after 2 that they hope will be that, and one specifically to fill a role that was in question. Olamide Zaccheaus and Jamison Crowder are not on this roster. There was no punt returner on this team. They have one now, and somebody who has real explosive speed.
Correct.
Whether he ends up being this kind of playmaker on offense is to be seen, because most of the time when it's somebody that you think has not only has that explosive speed, but is going to be that, you get picked in the 1st round. He did not. So let's be fair about this. Like, I like what they addressed, but I'm not saying he's the answer or the running back is the answer at where they were picked. But it does fall in line with exact things that they needed. Guys who can make bigger chunk home run plays on that side of the ball.
Going into the draft too, and we talked about this, but the one position I felt pretty sure that they would take in addition to like lineman or whatever was running back.
Yes.
Because I knew they wanted.
I thought it was going to go earlier than it did because I just felt like they were going to go after somebody who had explosive playmaking skill at that position.
So did I. I thought, like, if you don't get that guy, get a fast receiver because you needed that too. Like, find another way to add more dynamic playmakers to this offense. Now, with Lane, again, as a punt returner, that's where he's going to help right away. He can help right away with that. And if that's what he does early, that's great because you can win with this receiver group. Like, De'Ami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, like those guys had their best years. Why is that? Well, a large part because the quarterback they played with, so like, you don't think Deebo Samuel can have a good year with this guy? Noah Brown, if he's healthy, and stays healthy, and like KJ Osborne, he's not going to be a dynamic guy, but he can be a 40 catch guy.
He's a pro.
Yeah, exactly. So, Zaccheaus did not do anything the year before with Philadelphia, but he did it the year before that, in Atlanta. He came here and he did it again because of quarterback, right? So Lane doesn't have to come in and make this huge impact on the offense. However, he does have something that you can use, which is that speed. And when you watch him at Tech, there are a lot of his stuff was really as much horizontally as it was vertically. He can operate out of the slot, which is good, but a lot of stuff was end arounds, reverses, quick passes to the flat, little things to create space in the open field for him to turn and run. And so if you can do that, and I think the one thing you have to look at is Cliff Kingsbury is pretty good at finding ways to use guys. So they may only have a few packages for him right away, but if you have a guy with speed, you find a way to get him on the field. And I would, how many snaps he plays, I don't know. It's not going to just be a bunch of go balls. He's a 4.34 guy in the 40, but a lot of that speed was horizontal and then on punt returns in particular. So he can help you in that area. But yeah, offensively, who knows? Like, we've seen guys with speed who can't play, but I do think with Kingsbury that he'll find a way to incorporate that in some way. But the impact early is absolutely as a punt returner.
Yeah. I mean, this is another conversation for another day, but Luke McCaffrey's going to be fighting to get a job on this team this year, just based on the receiving core that they have on this team now that's coming into camp. I mean, there's not a lot of room. There just isn't. So it's probably another conversation for another day because I know people are like hopeful that he's going to take this big step up. But if you just look at what they're bringing in, McLaurin, Debo, now they got a 4th round pick who's likely to be their punt returner, right? They're basically outwardly saying that. And there is nobody else that I would consider would be vying for that, at least off the bat. Noah Brown, you know what he did last year for them, and he's back again. And then you got KJ Osborne, Michael Gallup, and Luke McCaffrey for at most 2 spots. He's going to be fighting for a job this summer.
So, and then it's, there's a lot to determine there. I'd have a hard time believing that he wouldn't make it just because he was one of their, first draft class.
Yep.
However, if you're going by true competition, but yeah, I mean, that's no problem with that, man, because you get better by doing that. And it's going, the other thing with McCaffrey, it's like you go by actions, and their actions were they added to the depth there, and their actions were as the season went on, he got less playing time and he got less targets. And so like that's something that you look at, like why is that? And will he take that step? I'd say the same thing for tight end Ben Sinnott. Same kind of situation. He got less playing time and far fewer routes.
But we just got through the draft and they didn't pick a tight end, which would have the same conversation. Like he's got what is an obvious, legitimate chance to grow in year 2, show what he can do, be that guy. McCaffrey's already in a battle here in year 2. All right.
I agree.
All right. Last thing real quick. I want to go back to edge rush just for a moment because there is a second wave of free agency now. And there are a lot of name edge rushers that are available. Right. So is there anyone that comes to mind that you think, okay, now they may revisit this now that we're past the draft?
Yeah. And I don't know who they're going to look at this point. I know Zadarius Smith is out there. Von Miller's out there, there are guys who have, again, names. And Darius Smith was traded from the Browns to the Lions, and they opted not to re-sign him. So, the Lions did it, but he did have 9 sacks last year. And I could see a situation where they bring one of those guys in. They know who's out there. They've been monitoring that for sure. So I could see a situation where if they wanted to bolster it, bring one of those guys in and let them be a situational rusher. They don't have to come in and play the run. They've brought guys in who can do that and who they like on early down. So you don't have to come in and wear yourself out playing the run. Come in and add to the pass rush. So yeah, I could see something like that. And I don't, it's not to mitigate. When I was talking earlier, it's not to mitigate the need for an edge rusher. I just didn't think they were going to force it. I did talk to someone before, like, don't be surprised if yeah, they'd like to get one, but if you don't, they're not going to sweat it because I think they feel like they can play with what they have. But if you can find another guy who can add a little bit more pass rush pop, because listen, Bram, they did look for that guy in free agency. They were in on DeMarcus Lawrence. They had at least shown interest in Joey Bosa. So they did look for those kind of guys, and a couple of the next tier of guys available are still out there.
All right. You can read all of John's work, obviously, on ESPN.com. And you had a great breakdown of each of the days on your podcast separately throughout the weekend. So if you want to hear kind of a breakdown on all 3 of the days as they went by, check out John's great podcast, The John Keim Report. As always, John, thank you, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Bram.
All right, welcome back. I just want to spend a few minutes on Shedeur Sanders for a moment here. I'm going to spend a lot more time, I think, with Callow tomorrow talking about, obviously, all the teams and what they've done. And the Shedeur Sanders thing was just such a huge NFL draft moment. And obviously, everybody has an opinion about why he fell into the 5th round, which I would say this about him. I think a couple things can be true at once. Number one, is he really a first-round pick, can't miss prospect at the quarterback position? I would argue, and go check the tape on this with this show numerous times, and it's just my opinion, but I've watched so much football in my life. I didn't see it. And it doesn't mean he won't become that. There's plenty of players that have been drafted in the mid-rounds, or plenty of players that have been told they're not the can't-miss prospect that no one should pass on. The team that had the number 2 overall pick traded it instead of taking him. They had multiple opportunities, including multiple picks in the 2nd round to take him. They didn't. They actually picked another quarterback before they selected him, which is a weird circumstance that I don't want to spend a lot of time here talking about, but is worth breaking down. So every team passed him over for a number of rounds, and then eventually Cleveland gets to him in the 5th round and brings him in. I thought he handled that very well. Not using the obvious, the level of slide to kind of carry the day in his messaging. It was more positive, optimistic, and hey, I was drafted by an NFL team and I'm ready to work. What ended up happening off of this, obviously, was a lot of people giving a lot of opinions about why. And I love Mel Kiper. He is a legend. He is a trailblazer. The NFL draft is as popular as it is because he's one of the original hot takers that mattered by going on to, I don't even know if hot take's the right play to put it. He would go on to the draft telecast and he would tell you by doing all the work that he did, what he thought of what teams did. And if he disagreed with them, he had no problem saying it on the air and said, I am evaluating these people as well as anybody in these front offices. Period. The end. You can't tell me otherwise, and I'm entitled to my opinion. And he is one of I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I think I've said this before. I think Mel Kiper should be in the Hall of Fame for what he's done to elevate the NFL draft from where it was when he started on ESPN to where it is now, where it's Lollapalooza in Green Bay and a traveling circus. And hopefully one day he'll be here on the National Mall. Who knows when we get our turn around here. I got to tell you, though, the hill he died on for Shedeur Sanders over the weekend was surprising to me, didn't really make a tremendous amount of sense, and was really one of the first times that I've watched him stand up for a player, and I just didn't understand where he was coming from. I agree the 2 things can be true at once. Shedeur Sanders probably should have gone higher than the 5th round. I agree with that. Shedeur Sanders, as a quarterback, as a talent, as the pedigree of who his father is, like all of that maybe adds up to the idea that some teams just didn't want to deal with what they thought would be potentially a player who, if they don't think he's that good, is it worth the quote unquote trouble with him? And when you mean by trouble, it's not that he's trouble, but there's just a lot that comes with him. And considering who his father is, you have to take into consideration all of these things. And I think it's fair stuff to think about. If you're the coach of a team, are you concerned that Deion Sanders is going to be weighing in on your game planning, on everything, inserting himself into conversations with owners or GMs about the job you're doing if his son isn't succeeding? I think that's a very fair question to ask if you're someone that's trying to think about whether you're going to draft him or not. Secondarily, I don't know what happened in all of these meetings with teams, but I will say this. Shedeur Sanders and Deion Sanders have both told on themselves a little bit over the last year and a half. Deion is on the record saying, and he changed his mind, he changed his tune, but said there were places he didn't want him to go. And Shedeur has openly stated there were some places that, he made it kind of clear, like he wasn't like taking the interview as seriously as he probably should have. And then some of the stories that ended up, probably because he was tanking them. And then there was these other stories that kind of popped up that the interviews went really poorly. And there were some examples that have kind of leaked out of things that seemed really unprofessional. I think the bottom line is this, personally. Teams do not, or actually, let me put it this way. Teams will put up with just about anything short of potential criminality if you have the talent. If you have the talent, they will overlook a lot of these things. Maybe it wasn't the best interview on earth. Maybe his dad is someone you are a touch concerned about. But if he's so uber talented that you can't not take him, especially if you need a quarterback, they'll do it. And I'll give you this one example, and then I'll talk more about this tomorrow. What were people saying about Caleb Williams a year ago? His father might be a little too involved. Now, his father's not Deion, but might be too involved. Had done interviews in GQ magazine. I might go back to school if I don't like what the number 1 pick is going to be. People were talking about his fingernails, what he wore, crying in press conferences, crying after losses. Do his teammates really like him? There was so much talk about it. And you know what ended up happening? Because I'm going to guess that not every interview went swimmingly with him. Remember, he said he wouldn't even give his medicals to many teams because he's like, only one of them's taking me. What happened? They took him number 1 anyway. You want to know why? Because his talent's undeniable. Because whatever you think of him and whatever you think of his future, what you cannot question is what you saw on the field when he played at USC. That's not what you can say about Shedeur if you're being completely honest. Could Shedeur end up being a really good quarterback? Yeah, of course. Could Shedeur end up becoming a really great player, and someone that never should have been overlooked here? Yes, absolutely. But the play wasn't that. He wasn't up for a Heisman Trophy. His teammate was. And for good reason. There isn't anybody who sits there and goes, nobody even sits there and goes, he was the best quarterback last year in college football. That's the bottom line. And I think it's a very simple thing. And I know everybody's got their say about it, but the reality is, if his talent was undeniable, what happened over the weekend would not have happened. It's because it isn't undeniable. It doesn't mean he can't change that. And it doesn't mean he can't become a great quarterback. But all of the evidence coming into it did not say, this is the next Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. Take your pick of recent quarterbacks, Cam Ward, that look like they could be it. That's all it is. And I found it unnerving where the conversations went about it. I'll talk more about it tomorrow. Bram, ESPN 630 Sports Capital.